No public comments. We'll move on to the workshop. Proposed 2011 budget.
Yes, Mr. President, members and members of the public, this is a continuation from last week. I believe we were taking questions and discussion from the board.
Does the board have any questions on the budget? I think.
Who's going to start?
Go ahead.
I have a question on OPED. Energy's, where's Mr. Broking? Energy's share is 65%. And what formula did you use to come up with 65% for energy?
Actually, I don't know what formula was used. It was back in 2007. I'll ask if there's one of the energy or water representatives know that answer. If not, I'll have to get it for you.
You want me to approve the budget today, and you don't know, you can't answer my question?
Right this minute, I don't. Yes, I do not know the formula for that.
While you're there, I also want to make a comment that this budget plan, for me, is very difficult to understand. We have the service agreements separate from the budget, and it just makes it more complicated. I had questions to ask, and then I realized the answers were in this document here. And as a board member, I have problems with it. Imagine other folks that do not get the same information that I receive. And my recommendation, Mr. Broken, is for the budget for next year. Can you make it more user-friendly, or can these service agreements, these contracts, can they be worked into the budget so that by a line item or somehow where they're easier to work with? Or is there a reason why we did it this way this year?
There is a reason why we did it this way. The service agreements that were provided you was at the request of one of the board members. It wasn't part of our budget preparation. It was more of a request for information.
Okay. Excuse me. Before we begin, President Sanchez, Mr. Casares wanted to make some comments under public comment, and I think it's really important. Can he come forward?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Casares?
Sorry about that. Greetings, Director Mendoza. Congratulations, Mr. Desert, on your win. And Mr. Hanks, congratulations. But I have to confess, I didn't vote for you, but I do support you. I do support you 100%. So we're okay right there. And greetings, Mr. Minville and Mr. Sanchez. Okay, I'm here with some very good and happy news. The last 2 weeks, in conjunction with the IID, the IBW 465 sponsored a toy drive with the recipient being Woman Haven. We placed 37 toy collection boxes throughout the IID, and it was for the employees to decide whether to contribute or not. And I'm proud to say that many of them did make the right decision by placing a toy inside our collection boxes. And thanks to their contribution, Women Haven, when we called them, they were just expecting 3 boxes filled with toys. We surprised them. We delivered 12 boxes. And I'm proud to say the employees, with only 10 days of notice, contributed 207 toys. And they were an assortment of dolls, train sets, remote control cars, basketball, footballs, and other great toys, along with 151 smaller toys that were used to fill stockings. It allowed Women Haven to provide for the needs of 50 families. And I've sent some photographs to your email addresses. And I can tell you, there is a great pleasure in helping those who are less fortunate than us. And as employees, we are very grateful to the public for providing us with employment. And we will continue a toy drive every single year. Next year, we promise you, we will increase our contributions by 30%. The generosity of the employees makes me very proud to be an IID employee, and they should be commended for their generosity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Casares.
Mr. Brokey?
So, Mr. Brooking, getting back to my question, so if this board member had not asked for this service agreement, where is this information in the budget then?
Well, there are service agreements listed in the budget. Well, I shouldn't say service agreements. There are
Contracts or what?
proposed contracts that we plan on using, some of which haven't been identified yet because of the bidding process. Some are place orders where they think they may use a particular consultant or contract for a service and may end up using someone else for that service. So the handout that was given is what's currently in effect. That we have contracts with those.
So if we have, say, for instance, a service agreement that's multi-year, and it goes from 2010, 2011, you wouldn't have that in the 2011 budget?
Yes, if we had a service agreement.
Are those in the budget if we have multi-year?
Yes, they should be in the budget.
Yeah,
yes,
they are. Like, for instance, like Irby, I couldn't find Irby in the budget.
Well, go ahead. Dave.
Well, Ms. Mendoza, I think
There's
whether-
a reason for not finding Irby in the budget, because the 3-year agreement with Irby is expiring.
Expiring this year, so-
We are in negotiations
Okay.
and solicitation for a new vendor.
All right, well, that answers my question. Thank you.
When will that be coming forward to us?
It should be coming on the January 4th board agenda packet.
I think, Director Mendoza, I think what you're saying is, I know we had this separate sheet on service agreements, which is not part of the budget. And in the budget, they had the gross amounts, but it didn't sometimes give the names of who they were.
Like, for
Like
instance,
on Brian's, on the executive, he just has a gross amount. And then you got to go to the service agreement sheet, which is separate from the budget. And what you're saying is you'd like to see the names of who the service agreements are listed along inside the budget book somewhere, so we don't have to go to a separate document to retrieve the information you're looking for.
exactly, I was coming to
Well,
that.
that's what would be helpful for me also. So I'm in agreement with that.
Well, if I could, I'd like to caution the board on the document that you are reading. Not being aware that there was a request for contract information, I'm not sure exactly what document you have, but if it's the one I think it is a monthly report that comes from the contracts group, and it is a report that shows, as far as contracts is concerned, all open agreements, which does not mean that there's a correlation per se to actual vendor agreements and or that there's a correlation to the budget. What contracts does is they have a system that they use. Yeah, that's what this is. This is their list to identify who an agreement has been opened with. And some of these, as you will notice, have already been expended. There's 0% remaining in the contract. They've been out there for a period of time. Each year we go through this and try to close those out, those that have zero funds or have been open for a period of time. Unfortunately, we don't always get them all closed. So even though the list is quite long, that does not mean that these are budgeted contract items. You could see a name on here, and unfortunately, I can't read the small print, but you could see a contract listed on here that is no longer valid because it is not in the budget. However, because there may be an issue with an outstanding activity with the vendor from a financial perspective, there's an invoice in dispute or whatever the case may be, that contract from contracts perspective is not closed, which is again this document. One of the issues that we do have is sometimes people use this document to identify, well, there's a service agreement out there and a contract with this vendor, and it says that there's $20,000 left. I can use that. The process that's been put in place with the new purchasing policy is that just because this report shows that there might be $20,000 out there, that's why we've incorporated, it has to go through the controllers and the finance department to validate that there's funding in the budget for that service agreement. There's not necessarily correlation to this report and to the budget. This is a report that shows all service agreements and contracts with vendors, but it does not mean that we actually have funds available for those contracts. In fact, some of these have probably expired at this time.
Well, the reason that I was asking is because there's a couple of them, like Dolly Mack. We have here a service agreement for her for $164,000.
Which page are you on, Ms.
This
Mendoza?
is page 1 of 1.
Oh, one of one.
And this one here, and the service, this one. It's not.
Okay.
It's not in the budget.
Oh, I understand.
And that's why I don't understand. So, are we going to utilize her for this coming year for 2011?
We don't have any money in the budget for her, no. She did some work in conjunction with strategic planning at a staff level this last year, and now the 160-some thousand is from
164.
Yeah, from inception. That doesn't mean we spent 164,000.
You spent 160,899.
Right, since inception, which is almost 3 years.
And also Dennis Shinaev. Shinaev, 166,000, and I think we spent you spent 117,320.
Right.
And is it percent remaining 100%? That's probably incorrect.
Where's that?
It says,
I may not have the same one. In the back.
48,000 is available.
$48,680
Right.
left. Now, as far as I know, he hasn't given us a report. What does he do?
He is looking at the relationship between the county, IID, the cities, and how we do entitlements.
I can tell you what the relationship is. We don't need to pay a dude, how much money? $166,000 to tell you that?
Well, we're going to be bringing a report to you on that, and then you could decide whether it's useful or not.
When did you hire him? What was the date?
I don't know.
Has it been a year?
No.
6 months?
I would have to look it up.
Well, Mr. Brady, I see this number here, and I don't see any evidence of his work. The board has not been presented with a report.
I don't have 14.
We expended over $100,000 on his contract, and unless I've been absent from a board meeting, I really don't know
I see.
what he's doing, if it has any value or not.
That's why we're going to be bringing it to you.
When?
Well, it'll be January, yes.
So how long has he been working for the IID?
I'm looking to see when we, it doesn't show on here when,
Well, he's been well over a year, Brian.
no, I don't think so, sir.
It's been close to, I think what she's trying to say, and even from my standpoint, like with Dennis, he probably should be reporting to us quarterly for every 6 months. There should have been something out here because he's spending money, you're using him with the cities and the county and the interface. But
That's correct.
he sits here in the audience and during the meetings, but we've never seen any documentation from him. We've never seen him come to the podium and give a report on what it is he's doing, so it's bothersome.
Well, I will bring it. I have enough. We on staff, senior staff, have many vendors who do work for us that we don't automatically come up with a quarterly report to you on that. So anyway, the operative thing is that I will bring forward to you a report on what he's doing. He has finished whatever work he was doing at my direction until I make a decision on whether there's anything else for him that would be useful. But I will bring that forward in January.
And Brian, the reason I bring it up is that we have, in my opinion, a very well qualified public affairs department that I think they have the background, they have the relationships here in the valley and in the Coachella Valley to do exactly what this gentleman is doing. And for the life of me, I can't understand why we're paying someone to work on the relationships with the counties and the cities when we have our own folks here that can do that.
Well, when I say relationships, I'm talking about our procedural and relationships with the county. For instance, we were working closely with Mr. Herberger on the entitlement process and permit processes that go between IID and the county, and how to improve that. Also, we've been dealing with a number of the cities on the same thing. I need to bring back a report to you and explain in detail what we've been working on.
Well, like Director Menville's comment is rather bothersome to me to have to pay out this money and not have any results. California strategies, are they in the budget for next year, or are we done with them?
No, ma'am. In 2010, we had one invoice left over from 2009, but they haven't done any work for us since almost a year ago.
Well, it's my recommendation that we utilize our public affairs department, which I think are very well staffed and they're competent. They know both valleys. There's any public relations to be done, any relationships to be worked out, let's utilize them and not have to pay extra money. On D35, KR Celine, he's in the budget for $20,000. That's energy. I thought we were not going to be use him anymore because he was working for the other side.
That's correct, ma'am.
So why is he in the budget for 2011?
We had him in as a placeholder. There is some work on transmission, primarily with the cluster, that this budget doesn't really allow us to put in blanks. And we talked about this at one of the earlier workshops and said that we just put it in as a blank or as a function.
Well, it bothers me as a board member. You all are asking me to approve this budget today, and you have Ken Celine for $20,000 after being told we're not going to use them in 2011. So
I understand.
Unless there's another way to work it out, Mr. Broking. Because if I approve this budget, there's $20,000 for Mr. Celine, and I was told we were not going to use him anymore. Well, but the budget says we are.
Well, I think when we print the vinyl version, we can eliminate KR Celine and just put in load forecast studies for $20,000.
Something like that, yeah.
No, and that's why we're here, Director Mendoza, is to answer all the questions so we can get you comfortable, ready to vote.
So going back to this Dennis Kachian or Kanian, so Shanayan, I'm sorry, Shanayan. There's $48,000 left in his contract. Is that going to carry over to 2011?
Yeah, that's just available in the contract. I don't have any intention of having him do any additional work until I brought a report to the board and there's something additional for him to do.
Looking forward to his report. Okay. Anybody else has any questions?
Well, on that OPEB follow-up on Director Mendoza's question, that 65%, don't we have more energy workers than water workers?
Well, there are more energy workers, and I'm pretty sure it's based on salaries. But before I give a pretty sure answer, I'd like to research it and give a correct answer.
And the reason I asked that, Director Sanchez, is because when in 2000, when we were implementing SAP, Director Kuhn, who's a good friend of mine, wanted to split the cost. 90% energy, 10% water. I said, no way in hell is that going to happen. So we argued back and forth, and we came with a more reasonable division. So, and that's why I question it. Why is energy having to, 65%? Show me the numbers. Why did you come up to 65%?
That's what we intend to do, to show you the calculation.
Mr. Brokane, along that line, I understand, we have, as we discussed last time, some unfunded liabilities there. So I don't know what that records keeping has been like over the years. And you probably don't have any better idea on that than I do. But I would imagine, depending upon the age of retirement and so forth, but most of that should be a hard number, should it not? Not just a arbitrary number picked out of the air.
Oh, you mean the allocation?
Yes.
Yes, there should be. The board implemented GASB 45 in 2007, so that's going to be my first place that I start to see if there was something in the file that shows how the allocation was made, and then we'll go back and look at each of the individual years since then.
Probably under the old retirement system, energy people probably retired sooner than water.
There was a presentation made to the board in 2007 by the actuarialist that provided the information as to what the OPEB expenditure would be at that time. And if I remember correctly, that's a few years back, that there is an expectation that on a 3-year basis that another actuary study would be done, because again, the workforce population changes, which does affect that number, because it is based, as you identified, on the number of people who would be eligible for retirement at the current time of employment. So it is something that does change. So we have a number that was given to us based on the actuarial study that was done in 2007, but that number will change when we do the next study.
It's actually every 2 years. We had an update in 2009, and I imagine we'll have another update in 2011.
More than likely, it's not an arbitrary number.
I would hope not, but
Yeah.
And that is my concern. I want to make sure that we're fair to both water and energy, and we get the correct number. Also, at the last budget workshop that we held, I had made the recommendation not to fund the dues to the large public power council. There's 2 letters here in our packet, one from Steve King and one from Mark Limbach. I still think that I'd like to try this experiment. Not funded for 2011. Look at our expenses, see if they do go up, like Steve King says that he would expect FERC Council to increase their workload to the district. I don't think it's really going to come out to that, but I'd like to just not pay those dues for 2011 and then compare the workload, the extra workload that might go to FERC Council, and then for 2012, let's revisit the issue. That would be my recommendation. Of course, it's up to the board to decide what you all would like to do.
Well, I believe last meeting we agreed to cut it out.
We had agreed to do the internship program, but not the large public power council.
We voted not to take it out. We voted to leave it in.
What? No, we didn't.
I think we voted. Didn't we vote?
No, we didn't.
Well, there was
Direction?
our recollection. There were 2 votes for Mr. Desert and Ms. Mendoza to take it out, and there were 3 that were not.
I had some more questions I wanted to ask about.
Well, to my recollection, there was a vote to remove the internship program.
Are you looking for funding to
But there was no vote
Are you looking for funding to pay the FERC?
No, what I am saying is that for 2011, delete the dues to
Right.
the large public council, and then let's analyze the work. If there's added work to our FERC council, if it's going to be more expensive, then perhaps in 2012 we could rejoin the large public power council. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's my opinion.
We voted to pull the interim MBA out.
Yes.
We did not take a vote on LPPC.
We didn't take a vote on the LPPC.
Actually,
We didn't.
Because Director Hanks wanted some more information.
Yeah.
Director Mendoza, any
No, that would be my recommendation on the LPPC, just to remove it for next year and see how it goes.
How much is that?
65,000.
65,000, then it probably comes out to about 100,000 when you add all the travel and everything else.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Brady, do you have any more comments on that since this email from Steve Keen and Limbog?
Yes, sir, and members of the board, you have that in front of you. That Steve's back east, I think, on vacation, so he sent this. I guess he had looked at the clip sheets, as well as Mark Limbaugh, who, of course, is one of our representatives from the Ferguson Group in Washington, D.C. Both of them share my opinion that I haven't talked to either one of them directly, but share my opinion that LPPC is a very important component in our lobbying efforts, in our efforts to protect our balancing area, to protect our interest at FERC, at EPA, and while yes, we could save some money, and I 65,000, and I would guess it's more like another maybe 15 to 20,000 travel, but it might be more than that. I think this is well worth it. I think taking this component out of our lobbying efforts is a little bit like playing Russian roulette with a very important. We've gotten our act together on regulatory compliance with WEC and through the terrific efforts of our staff and our consultants, and I think this is this work that LPPC does is as important a component. I will tell you that just incidentally, I'm the vice chair of the Environmental Task Force for LPPC. I believe Dane Vaughn is involved with the CIO roundtable, which is very helpful. The important thing here, from my perspective, is that we are one of the 25 largest public sector electric utilities. There are thousands and thousands of public sector electric utilities, but are on average quite small and don't share some of our interests. And I believe that this is important, and Mr. Jain has some comments.
If you don't mind my addressing, there's some history that I have on LPPC, on when it was formed somewhere around 20-plus years ago. At the time, the American Public Power Association was sort of dominated, and still is dominated, by very small, numerous very small systems that were primarily distribution utilities that were only interested in the cost of purchase power and on other issues that affected small systems. I mean, they have hundreds and if not thousands of these systems in the country. Many of them located in the South. Tennessee has over 100 of them. And the larger systems, in particular, Los Angeles, who started, I believe it was Norm Nichols of LADWP, who started this concept of LPPC, was concerned that APPA was taking a position at the federal level on legislation, on regulatory proposals that were not in the interests of the larger systems. The larger systems have substantial generation, which you do not have in the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Bonneville systems. You have distribution utilities. Most of those do not generate at all. And so that the larger systems have very different issues that they need to be represented on. And as these issues started to come to the forefront in the Congress, it was the feeling of the larger systems like LA that we needed a separate entity that represented the large systems, and not to do this with any kind of opposition to APPA, but rather as a complement. And at that point, why I remembered this so succinctly is that Norm Nichols sort of drew the line for who should be in LPPC at a point that was just above Anaheim, so Anaheim couldn't join, because there were issues between LA and Anaheim. Anaheim now is a member because it has grown to that point. But my fear about dropping out and see what happens is, and then join back in, is that even at LPPC, even though those issues are more in line with what we're interested in, which is transmission and generation and having our own balancing authority, you will lose all your influence. That basically you have to have representatives like Dr. Brady who influence the positions that LPPC takes before the Congress. They're very influential, and when you drop out, that influence will go away. And I don't think you can pick it up again a year later because people say, well, you're in this year, you'll be out next year. So I don't think I'd love to be able to measure it the way you suggest, Director Mendoza, but I don't think that you'd be able to do that.
Mr. Jane, how many times has Mr. Brady gone before Congress to testify on behalf of LPPC?
I've been on 3 lobbying trips, one a year. Specifically to not before congressional committees, but before key members of Congress like Senator Feinstein, Senator Luker, others.
What is and just as critical is for him to be able to call up the LPPC executive director and say, this is the position of IID on that issue that's coming up at the FERC or and before Congress, so that they understand that that's where we're coming from. And my concern would be to lose that influence.
How many people are in the LPC compared to APPA?
APPA, there's thousands. I mean, I'm guessing 1,500 member systems. But again, they're from very small systems, some of which have 100 or 200 customers. The agreement that was formed when LPPCA was founded was that APPA was afraid everybody would drop out, and that LA and others agreed that they would stay in LPPC and APPA, but they would still use LPPC as their primary legislative effort. So I'm thinking maybe at least 1,500 members of APPA. I could be off by a couple of hundred.
And then the LPPA, how many members are there?
LPPC is about 25, isn't it? 25, yes. Again, an issue that comes up all the time is the cost of wholesale power and what you're charging for it, and that's where the APPA, since they're usually, these systems are buying from a small system, or they have a transmission issue in particular, because they're getting transmission from a transmission company. They don't have their own transmission. They're going to take a position that's in their interest, and that isn't necessarily, in fact, in most cases, isn't in the interest of IID, which has its own transmission. That's the difference.
In all these organizations, I know a year or so ago there was some talk about the Hoover Dam and us trying to get a percentage of hydro or electricity out of there. How did these organizations represent the IID's concerns? LPPA?
I don't know that
Ferguson
LPPC,
Group.
I don't know what LPP's position was on Hoover.
They didn't take a position on Hoover. That's really a regional issue, where actually that was more of a SCAPA issue for IID, because most SCAPA members were already in the had a Hoover allocation.
Well, and then how did SCAPA, how did that work out with our relationship and being a member of SCAPA? Did SCAPA represent the IID well on that? Did we come out well on that?
Well, let me start with the end result. The end result is the legislation has gone nowhere. It's into next year right now. Existing SCAPA members wanted to make sure they maintained their allocation. David, you were most involved with it.
The existing SCAPA members agreed to push legislation that resulted them giving up 5% of their capacity and energy. So whatever SCAPA had in its, I don't remember the exact amount, 1,800 megawatts, 2,000?
100 megawatts is available.
So they have 2,000 total. They gave up 100. What they agreed to do, and of this 100, it's going to be allocated essentially 1/3 to the state of Nevada, which Nevada can allocate to any entities that it chooses. 1/3 to the state of Arizona, which Arizona can do with whatever it wants. And 1/3 to California, which Western will allocate. So the SCAPA entities have agreed to support us getting a share of that. There's no guarantee that we will, but they've agreed to support us getting a share. And we'll go through a allocation at Western. Western had actually started the allocation process in anticipation of the legislation being completed by the end of this year. Senator Reid tried to bring it through in the omnibus bill that failed about 7 or 8 days before Christmas. And so it'll be carried over to 2011, and essentially we start from scratch.
Yeah.
Are we at odds with our SCAPA partners over
No.
what these want to get?
We were early. We had to take a negotiating position. What they were proposing was not necessarily good for us, and that happens all the time. We're looking out for our interests. Other SCAPA members are looking out for their interest, and once in a while the interests don't coincide. In this case, we were able to come up with an agreement.
Well, that leads me to the SCAPA question. Well, we have $25 million sitting in a reserve account at SCAPA for a funding of a project in the future. And what's our annual dues, or what do we pay into SCAPA to get that?
That's not what
million?
SCAPA is, sir.
Okay.
SCAPA is the district, LADWP, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, Anaheim, Banning, Colton, Riverside, and Azusa. The city of Cerritos, Rancho Cucamonga right now, I think, is in, with Victorville and Moreno Valley trying to get in, but not in. SCAPA is a finance agency. SCAPA goes out on behalf of itself, essentially, and this was really started by L.A.
Well, how did we get $25 million of our money into their account to do a project?
Mr. Broking can answer where that 25 came from.
It's not in their account, it's our account, and we can draw on that $25 million to pay any SCAPA project that we're a participant in.
But
how did it get there? How did we get $25 million credit?
It was over a period of years. There was a refunding done a few years back, and I believe it was on Palo Verde when interest rates came down, and the decision was made to fund at the current level that were in place before the refunding, and bank or place the balance in the rate stabilization fund. That was by far the most. I think there might have been one other time where there was some money put in the rate stabilization fund, but it was $1 million or so.
Yeah, I bring it up not as a concern to want to cut it out, because we're talking about cutting out line items here, but just overall representation of getting the best bang for the buck and the best deal for the IID, for the Imperial County, because all of us board members have that in common. We need to bond over that. And I am understanding that the Ferguson Group now at a federal level has taken over not just water, but doing our power, our business also?
That's correct.
And what happened to the other group?
The other group was
Deborah
Sliz, who we believed had a conflict of interest. She was representing both SCAPA and IID, and in particular over the Hoover issue, we felt we weren't being represented adequately by her. So I made the decision to separate from that, and the Ferguson Group has been very good on the energy side as well. But we take that year to year on who best represents us. At the moment, it's the Ferguson Group.
So then the Ferguson budget and the amount in the budget is larger than it was a year ago to cover the new.
It should be, yes, to cover both.
Just some concerns about the changes of who's representing us, and I've heard loud and clear about the amount of falling water that goes through the Hoover Dam, and the fact that we don't get to participate in any of that.
Right.
Historically, we haven't, and it's hard to get in after
that thing went off.
after things move forward. But but there is opportunities to change and negotiate. And I just have questions about what benefits we're getting from all these agencies and memberships, including SCAPA.
Understand.
Right. Again, sir, SCAPA is not a membership group. We don't pay dues. SCAPA presents a project. Entities can choose to participate or not participate, and then SCAPA just acts as the entity that issues the debt. So San Juan and Palo Verde are the only two SCAPA projects that we're currently in. We own neither of those projects. SCAPA is the owner, and then we enter into a power purchase agreement with that entity.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that's another subject we'll talk about. I'd like to see maybe that $25 million of SCAPA money that is IIDs invested locally here in geothermal or in transmission. That's some concerns I have, but we'll discuss that later.
Are there any other questions?
I'm glad to see the board concerned. That was why I brought up about meeting with the finance group and pushing forward a different type of budgeting process. There are two service agreement deals floating around now. I had a chance, by the way, on the LPPC, I learned more in the last 5 minutes than I did in 4 years. No reports coming back. I would see some of the magazines come out with meetings, and it seemed to me like it was Virgin Islands or Bahamas or somewhere.
No, sir. There was one in Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico?
It happens every 5 years, I think.
Okay. But, I mean, this is information that, as a board, we miss out on, and we're asked to make decisions on these things. The issue with SCAPA, and I'm glad that came up, because even though those are SCAPA projects, there are liabilities associated with it, and it's off balance sheet, so we don't get that information. We won't know until there's a problem at the SCAPA level, and then maybe it filters down to us. But as far as long-term planning, that was my issue the other day. But on the service agreements, I know it's mostly staff here, but I'd just like to go through so that the public has an idea of what we're looking at. The service agreements up through November 2010 for energy was the total amount of the service agreements was roughly $349 million, and the total amount expended was or committed was $169 million. And looking through some of these items, on the first one that was given to us, I had a lot of questions. Well, gee, that doesn't look familiar. Second one has a little bit more of a description, and so I've been able to piece some of that together. But we're talking huge amounts of our budget. Service agreements for the water department, 247 was the amount of the service agreements, and the total amount expended or committed was $237 million. The executive department, $3.1 million for the total, and the expended was $2.7. Finance department, $2 million service agreements and $951,000 expended. Human resources, $783 total service agreements, $783,000, and expended was $366. IT department, $5.8 million total service agreements, $3.8 expended. And as you can see, there's a large amount expended, and I like some answers somewhere down the line, and I'm not going to. We've had some workshops, but I will take the time with the budget group to go through and try to get an explanation for the board how those balances are carried over, or how we keep track of it. And then, big question for administrative service agreements. There was, the total service agreements was 5.4 million, but expended was 18 million. So I'd like an explanation of that.
Mr. Brokey? Where is he? Oh,
Well,
here you are.
he's just going to point at me anyway.
Oh, okay, Mr. Campbell.
As I previously identified, this report is not a budgetary report. It is a report that shows all service agreement contracts. And some of the service agreements that you will identify in here are in the operating expenditure portion, and a fair amount of these are in the capital expenditure portion, which would come out of MWA projects. So again, a good portion of the service agreements that you're reading on this come from capital projects, which aren't listed in the O&M section and really can't be listed in the capital project section, other than, we do the best we can to come up with, this is what we think a project is going to cost, because we haven't gone out and done the engineering on it yet, nor have we selected any vendors. But once those vendors have been selected, again, this list will include all vendors on contract for O&M expenditures, multiple year, as you'll notice on the one of the line items on the executive group. We still have, according to this report, we still technically have an open agreement with Ziad, but you will notice the last payment was made in '08. There's an invoice issue that we're still working through, but we have not done work with Ziad for over a year, but nonetheless, it still shows up on this report. To the question specifically asked about the $18 million, the majority of that, because of the Easter earthquake, and I being the fortunate one to have who signed the document to declare the emergency, a lot of those contracts, extensions, and the work done for the earthquake recovery are under that expenditure. Those will be sorted out as we work through closing the books on contracts at the end of the year.
Okay. Along the same line, one of the goals that we set was storage, and so I kept looking for, well, where in conversations I had with Dr. Brady, we talked somewhat about storage, right. And I knew there was some companies working on them. I didn't know the names of the companies. And I kept looking through the first one that was handed out that I'd asked for, and I couldn't, it's listed, but I didn't know what service it was providing until I got the second one today, this board meeting. And I ran across, just happened to thumb through it, Soil Works or something like that.
Yep.
So that's, and there was enough information there that I realized then, okay, there is work being done. There is a company, okay. But I think what we're saying, staff feels like this isn't part of the budget, but it is part of the budget. It is part of the expenditures. And even if it was in the form of a consent agenda item where we just recognize that service agreements have gone out to different ones that come before us, so that we don't take a bunch of time. If there's something on there that we have a question, then we have the opportunity to come down and say, well, what was this particular issue? But a lot of these, we get asked by the public about different contractors or engineers, and I have no clue. So it's this is extremely helpful to me personally.
Mr. Brokey, I have a question. Where in this budget are the capital projects listed?
They're in the back on
Under capital plan?
They're on the E section.
Yeah, that's where. That's right. So capital improvement plan, that's where your capital projects are listed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
No other questions on the capital project?
No, you can.
Are there any other questions on the companies that we are spending money on? I think that's the most important thing here today. Let's ask questions on the companies we are spending money on and how it affects the district.
I have two general comments about the budget, one on power and one water. Is this an appropriate time, or do you want to get through these first?
No, go on.
Mr. Brokin, my concerns on the budget, in the agenda write-up today in the narrative, there's a reference to the SCAPA money, the $25 million, and the OPED money. But what I don't see is I don't see any reference to the $50+ million for the rate stabilization account that was set up a year ago.
Right.
And along on this same thought here, I believe that account was set up a year ago prior to adopting last year's budget because there were some extra revenues. Perhaps it's over collection of ECA, perhaps it's not. But some decisions needed to be made at what was going to be done with these revenues before you pass the budget. And my concerns on the power side today are the same. You presented a program, a slideshow, PowerPoint, and it showed there was some $55 million in excess revenues or profit for the power department. And if we adopt the budget today, are we in fact adopting the use of that $55 million for another project, say a capital project? Are we foregoing any further calculations on the ECA presentation that I believe Director Menville has brought up? Or can we go back in time after we adopt the budget and in fact amend our rate stabilization account if it appears and we decide that there's ECA over collection?
The board can amend the budget at any time during the year.
Okay. That's my concern, though, is last year the rate stabilization account was set up prior to adopting the budget. And this year we're moving forward with the budget without fully analyzing what that $55 million of extra revenues came from.
Well, I think the rate stabilization account was established at the time the 2008 bond issue occurred. It hadn't been funded until it was funded this year as part of the 2009 fiscal year, where it was funded $53.5 million.
Yeah, the part of the budget. And then, so that's my concern on the power side. And then on the water side, is the same concern, except involving QSA water transfer monies. We have water rates that are set up to establish what our cash flow is, what our revenues are going to be. But in fact, now we're talking about this and airing this out. And I'm a new board member here, and that QSA nightmare didn't start when I was on the board or carry on, and neither for you, Mr. Brokin, either. And I would like to just shed light as to where we're going to be able to track the QSA transfer monies that are in fact being incorporated on an annual basis into the water budget, so we know as we move into the future and as we take a future look at what water rates should be or not be.
Well, we budget for those revenues separately, and then either once or twice a year I give an update on the status of the QSA, both revenue and expenses. And at that time, I think the last one was, I think it was in September or October it was given. So we'll probably do an update once we close out 2010 and update the numbers for the board at that point. So that would probably be the second quarter of 2011.
Okay, so does this budget before us now show the transfer monies that are being put into the water department's general fund?
Yes.
Not all the transfer monies, but the actual transfer monies that are going to be utilized and spent this
year.
No,
it's budgeted separately. It's so we didn't break out, where the money was going to be spent. We just segregated where the money was coming from.
And as we move forward in the future, what kind of a document do we ask for, an appendix or addendum to the budget, so we can do this tracking rather than having it in a narrative for a rate stabilization account, for the other items that are listed here, for the OPED or the SCAPA $25 million. What kind of a document am I looking for or asking for so we can track that? It's going to be a separate external docket to the budget. It won't be included in the budget, but it should be presented at the same time as a heads up to all the directors and those in the public that are listening.
I think as part of the budget process, we can show you the total transfer revenue and the transfer expenses that are budgeted for that year. It's a little more difficult going forward and trying to do that on a monthly basis. But that here again, that's what our 6-month updates are for, where we could provide you with that information.
Yeah.
So I think we can provide you with that information at budget time and then updated twice a year with actuals.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to see, is just a one-page document that we can show our SCAPA money, our QSA transfer funds, where we're at currently. So if anybody wanted to look back at it, we could see what we spent in the prior year. ECA account, rate stabilization account. I think Director Hanks brought up something about the San Juan power plant future payments, if there's mortgage payments still available out there that we have to pay for exposure. Just a way for us to track that, especially those big ticket items like that.
To address SCAPA and Palo Verde and San Juan in particular, those commitments are listed in our financial statements as footnotes, and we've been disclosing those for years as to what the future commitment is. When we budget, we only budget what we owe for in this particular case, 2011 for those projects. Although, as I just said, they're included in our 2009 financials. I think it's footnote 11.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I'm new here, but I'm just trying to figure out a better way for me to track it and communicate that to the public, because I know the $25 million that came up was found out about sitting in the SCAP account a couple years ago. I don't know if it came out of an ECAC meeting or where, but that was kind of a surprise to everybody. We didn't really know we had $25 million, and it would help to have it listed somewhere rather than just a footnote or appendix. If we could put them all together so we could track.
Well, it is reported every month now on our monthly financials, the balance in
the water transfer
rate stabilization.
Water transfer amounts are also included in that monthly report?
All cash levels are reported on a monthly basis.
And can you tell me how much money we put into the current budget from the water transfers to assist in the funds required for the water department outside of what the revenues are going to be generated by the rates?
Are you asking me how much the water transfer is subsidizing the water department? Is that
Yes.
the question? I can give you the amount of revenue from the transfers and the amount of expenses, and that's not necessarily what will be subsidizing the department. It's what's available to assist the department.
Yeah, no, I understand that with the legal expenses and things, but it's just a way to track it better for me. I mean, I don't know how the other directors can track it, but I'm looking for some better visuals to track those.
If you minus the revenues minus expenses, QSA expenses, whatever's left over.
That's exactly how we'll be doing it.
On Mr. Koch, on the 50 megawatt for SCAPA, weren't we using SCAPA, that $25 million to build that 50 megawatt here? Weren't we going to use that funds?
Excuse me. That was one of the alternatives available to us. And I believe you're asking about the 50 megawatt geothermal plant that we're in negotiations with. Generally, on that type of a project, SCAPA would say, well, this would be a power purchase agreement. There would not be SCAPA ownership, hence no need for debt on that project. But if it would, in most cases, SCAPA owns the underlying project. So it owns Hoover Dam, for example, where it owns San Juan. If we were in a project that SCAPA decided to own and issued debt, we could either enter into a power purchase agreement with SCAPA, which is the way we do currently with San Juan and Palo Verde, or we could use that $25 million to pay off our share of any project, or we could use that money to meet any payments from SCAPA.
I guess my question is, Director, I'm not sure where he was going with it. Do we really need $25 million? Do you see future projects for $25 million being used? or should we take 5, 10 from that and use it elsewhere?
How Mr. Broking decides whether or not the levels are there, I know he wants to draw it down a bit beginning in December and has decided to draw down some portion. No, I take that back. We have a refund due from San Juan that we've been overpaying. We're going to take that as a credit. The $25 million could be used, if we wanted to just pay down 9 months of 8 months of power from San Juan and draw that down to zero.
Is there a minimum SCAPA has us to put in? I mean, if we draw down, do we have to fill it back up later?
No, sir.
Okay.
We have no obligation to SCAPA other than to pay our power purchase bill each month.
Well, I'm not knocking SCAPA. I think I'm not a big isolationist either. The only time I believe in isolationists is they infringe on my rights, such as my water right or my balancing authority. But I like the regional approach to a lot of these power business deals. I guess that was my only question on that.
So we can pull the $25 million out separately for what we want to do with it, or do we have to? Are we dictated to what SCAPA wants to do with it?
No, we have to pay for IID SCAPA project. So we'd have to pay for either Palo Verde or San Juan or a new SCAPA project that we decide to participate in. That's what the money can be used
Could we
for.
get SCAPA to participate in Unit 3 repower?
Why would you want to do that?
Well, we can't. We don't have the funding. We can't do bonds.
That we could get SCAPA to participate in another geothermal plant or a solar plant down here, but we need, well, but we would not do it on the others.
So the $25 million isn't really ours to do with as we please.
Oh, if Mr. Broking decided that we wanted to upgrade our cash transfers, our monthly San Juan bill is about $4 million a month, 3.9, 3.7 in there. He could tell SCAPA each month for the next 6 months, use our balance and bring that down to zero, if that's what he wanted to do. So you would pay for our projects and then build up our internal cash. You'd transfer it. It would just take 5 or 6 months. But then if there were a call, such as with San Juan, where suddenly we had to come up with 10 or 15 or 20 million, then we would have to bring that up. In effect, this is a rate stabilization account against Palo Verde and San Juan.
Does the board have any other questions on the amount of monies being spent? And
I'd like to know the board's direction regarding
the LP?
LPPs.
I thought you forgot about that.
LPPC.
I'm gonna support it because we're only 25 members on that LPC. I think we do have LPPC. We do have different needs than smaller electric companies out there. I think it's important that we stay in that. Any other board have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do. I've read Mr. Keene's email and Mr. Limbaugh's, and I just feel that Mr. Keene knows what he's talking about here, and I know that there's FERC matters involved, and I would rather just hang with it another year. I know Mr. Jan said it's not good if we're in 1 year, out another year. And for $65,000 or $100,000, I know that's a lot of money, but it's very important that we stay on top of what's going on, because I think if we ended up getting fines out of compliance or something, it'd be a lot more than that. So I think it's money well spent, and we just roll with it another year, and from my perspective, and talk about it again next year.
I think the board should vote on it.
I got another question on it. On these meetings, is there a networking system with this group? I mean, what is the nearest utility in our proximity that's a member of that?
Los Angeles, Salt River Project, those are the two closest
Do we have any type of mentoring programs or
Well, this,
networking of peers, or is it just?
Yeah, exactly. As Mr. Campbell was mentioning, Dane Vaughn is part of the CIO. I don't know if it's called a working group or the round table, and Dane in particular finds it very informative to find out what's happening. I would use an analogy on regulatory compliance where we went, by the way, SMUD's a member as well in California. And as you recall, when we were going through regulatory compliance, the WEC regulatory compliance, we sent a team up to SMUD, and they told us lessons learned, and that same type of networking happens at the LPPC
They went up because
level.
of LPPC with.
No, not by drawing as an analogy.
Yeah.
The networking at LPPC is beneficial to us. Well, it's beneficial to everybody, networking, but there's HR, the information or IT, and of course the lobbying efforts.
Yeah, they're starting an HR roundtable as well, and it was scheduled. I was planning on attending, but it was scheduled during the same week as our WEC audit, so I wasn't able to go this year.
Director Mendoza, if you want to cut $65,000 from the budget, I'll support you on that, and just let Mr. Brady cut the $65,000 wherever he wants. I mean, that's the most important thing to you.
Do that.
Okay, well, let's eliminate $65,000 from your discretionary fund, and that will go toward LPPC.
Well, I'm not going to direct anything where it should go. I'm just saying.
Oh, I'm just saying from your, you have.
Yeah, I can find it. I can certainly find it, and then part of it certainly would be.
Is your motion?
I don't have a motion. I'm just giving. I don't have a motion, but my recommendation would be that to fund LPPC, the $65,000 should be funded from Mr. Brady's discretionary fund.
That's your motion?
It's not.
It doesn't. I can do that.
Yeah, you can do that.
I'll second it if that's your motion.
He has that much less to pay Dennis or Dolly.
All right.
Yeah, I'd also like to see us get more reports back. What's going on in the organization, and
that would be worth.
Point well taken on that. I mean, obviously that we haven't given you enough information up to this point is.
And I think communication between this board and and management is really important whenever you go to these LPPC meetings or APPA or whatever. It's important that we talk to one another and we give reports so we know what really truly is going on and where the money's being spent. It's not that I don't want to spend the money on these important issues. We just need to know about them.
Understood.
I've got was you wanting to vote on that one?
Direction?
Or you just want to throw that all in at the end?
We can throw that in the end with the $65,000.
Well, I'm planning on doing it.
Okay.
So you don't. Yeah.
On
travel.
Maybe I could I get Dan DuBois to come? Dan packs me some
stuff.
You probably see me going through all my stuff up here. I got 2 pages of it, but it had to do. I must have left it on my table at home. It had to do with the project management and also program management. In reading through the new job descriptions for program managers, it just reconfirms what my concerns are, that we're just gradually dismantling the function of our independent project managers. run across words like principles and practices of supervision, principles and practices of engineering and business management, project management practices and contract law, project management, computer operations.
What page are you on, Director Hanks?
Now these are for project managers, okay?
Oh.
And that's pretty much consistent with the PMO. But then you go to program managers, and it's just a variation. Principles and practices applied to project management, planning, budget, scheduling, and contract management. But some of the questions I asked, I'm finding inconsistencies. I'd asked about grades and so forth. And it appears from what I was given today that customer service, project managers, program managers, and portfolio, project managers in the PMO and so forth are all paid off the same grade. I think you probably find out under the old system there was I think there was a program manager that was a higher grade, but I don't know who filled these. I don't know whether they were in the reorg, whether they were assistant supervisors or, but it's just inconsistent with the answers I was given at the last meeting.
Dr. Hanks, I think there was two questions, right? One is the belief of watering down of project management, and two was the grade levels of the new job descriptions, that they seem to be a higher grade level than for the same job what they did the time before. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, let me go direct you to some pages in the budget that I've tagged here. D14. This is in construction resources. There's 5 new positions that are program manager seniors and vegetation project manager that's been ongoing. That's probably Mr. Watson. You're in the budget. That's the good news, okay? These other guys making the same amount of money, though. That's the bad news, okay? Then on page D17, and looking and following through with our resolution we passed, I just want clarification. On D17, engineer senior, there was one budget last year, there's none budget for 2011. Is that a reduction in staff, or is there a transfer, or is it just?
I believe, based on the resolution of the board, anybody that was slated to be eliminated is going to be funded.
Okay, so that's...
And so, we may call them something different, but their compensation stays the same.
Okay, so that's not
No.
a reduction, okay. On D19, again, we have another program manager senior, and there's a program manager specialist. I'm not sure what that is, but program manager senior there. Looks like I'm picking on water. I'll get to the other one. System controls and water, there's a program manager senior.
Still on D19?
That's on D21. I'm sorry, D21.
Are you asking their job descriptions, or are you?
No, I'll get to that. Okay. D26 on the All-American Canal, the dam. There's a Program Manager Senior. And D33, now we're getting into energy. There's a list of project coordinators, project managers, and project manager senior. Now, are these CSP personnel?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Okay. And then on page D37, there is a project manager. So I don't know whether is that separate? That's separate from the PMO too, is that correct?
What page in the budget is the, off the hand? I can't find it. No, yeah, I found that, but.
Then on D42, there's a project manager senior and a project manager.
That's what I can't find.
Project manager.
And then on page D93, and I believe this is project management portion of the budget. Yeah, project manager senior, project managers, and project coordinators. And it was my understanding that there were going to be no more project coordinators. Isn't that what we were told?
I can't answer that question.
That they were all going to be project managers?
Right.
Which page are you on?
D93.
Oh, 93.
Try to get a definition of what a program manager was and a project manager. And it looks like there's some overlapping, but I'm just concerned about that. I just wanted to point those out because I have brought that up as an issue.
Right.
We go from, on project coordinators, we go from 1 to 7 from the 2009 to the 2010 budget, 2011 budget. Well, can we get some explanation as what happened there?
Michael or
Sure.
Angel?
In 2009, the board requested that we staff a full complement. There was a presentation made to the board. The board gave direction that there would be project managers and project coordinators, and so I took that action. Actually, Dr. Brady signed off on the document where we moved people from other departments and created the project coordinator position and staffed it. I would like to point out that there is, I'm not sure what the issue is, but there is an analogy within the organization, because I appreciate the concern that it may look like there's project managers in other parts of the organization, but I think we have a recent example of how independent oversight and action and operations work, and that would be our recent WEC audit. The compliance office of a staff of 4 reports independently to the general manager's office. A staff of 22, although there's a few empty spots right now, of the PMO office reports independently to the general manager's office. To complete the WEC audit took the work of, I would guess, about 100 people to make that happen. And there are specifically staff within the Energy Department who have very corresponding positions to staff in the compliance office. So yes, there are some blurriness with job functions and job titles, but I want to make sure that the board's comfortable that while there may be people in the organization who have common titles, we are not giving up on the concept and the practice of independent oversight of both compliance and project management.
Well, it's difficult for me to understand how they could all be on the same range. I don't know exactly what the functions are of a program manager, but I imagine it's kind of a oversight of multiple ongoing projects that probably are really what I would call management.
I believe there, and I'd ask Jim to help out here, but Jim Ross, in terms of program managers.
Well, I don't want to get bogged down in the budget process, but I'd like for that to be explained, because it appears to me that the program managers are more
they're more operational managers.
Operational management than they are projects or capital projects and so forth.
Yes, that's correct.
And maybe their grade should be higher. I don't know, but it just to run them all in on the same grade, and I'm just struggling with it.
Well, when we apply our tools in HR in valuing positions, we run, whenever we create jobs, we run them through the same process to place value on those jobs. And as we go through that process, there's only 40 or so ranges, so they end up on many jobs end up on the same range.
Well, we just don't want to come back with any more of those studies that Director Mendoza loves so much.
We do one of those every 40 years.
And they're flawed.
Yeah.
And they're always flawed. I have a question. Stay right there. Mike Bell, what does he do? He's under the finance department. Is he also, what is he doing right now? We have him here for $100,000 under finance. What else is he doing for the district? Is he doing anything for human resources?
He is helping with our implementation of matrix recommendations. We have about 150 recommendations that we're putting in place.
So do you have him budgeted under your department?
No, I piggybacked.
So, okay, then, Mr. Broking, we have here $100,000 for Mike Bell. Is that, he only works for you and for human resources, or what else is he doing here?
He's working on asset replacement through asset management.
Yeah.
So what's the total amount that he's budgeted for 2011?
Well, he's budgeted for $100,000 out of my cost center. I'm not sure anybody else has budgeted for him.
Energy?
Have not budgeted for him.
Okay.
Any other questions?
You see, and that's what I have so many unanswered questions where the money's going, and it makes it very difficult for me. And I know how to read. Imagine if I didn't know how to read, how much more difficult it would be.
Well, I think it's one
we
thing
get
to
some results when I meet with Greg to go over these. I think I can relay the frustrations.
Well, I think it's one thing to talk about the line items that Mr. Brady has, the work that he's been doing and what he feels is necessary for the district to get into a position of that we need to be efficient, and a long-term plan and short-term plan, et cetera, et cetera. If, again, having said that, Ms. Mendoza, if you want to cut some kind of consulting,
No, that's,
then
no,
we should do it.
No, my question was, what is Mr. Bell doing? Because I don't know. I saw his name listed here, and I saw $100,000, and I don't know.
Right.
And that's why I'm asking. Right. And that's a legitimate question.
Yeah. No.
Talk to me. Tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
Understand.
I don't want to cut him out if we need him.
Right.
Nomás no sé qué está haciendo.
Right. And I think that's what we're here for, is to get the questions answered. And I think we can do it tonight. I think this board has had 2 months to get its questions together to be able to, and staff should be able to explain what these people are doing. And if the board feels like we need to save money or it's not, then we defund. Are there any other questions from the board?
Well, along that line, if there are concerns, how do we know where to cut? We don't know where it's budgeted.
Well, I don't know. What do you mean by concerns? I mean, it's
well, if it's not a budget line, and if it's just a budgeted fund, and it's buried in there, and there's something that you want to cut out, but you don't know where it's at because it's not a line item.
But what do I want to cut out?
Well, well, I don't know what you want to cut out.
Well, that's my point is I'm not going to tell Mario to cut 100 transformers because I don't know how many transformers he needs. He's the energy.
If you wanted to, where would you know where to cut?
I just say cut. I mean, that's what we're here is to listen to staff as to why they're spending their money.
Well, I think
if you don't like the direction,
I think we got our point across to the staff, and I think they've improved in the amount of information that they gave to us. You know, with these two documents here, job descriptions and so forth, and I think we got clarity on the November resolution that this budget, passing this budget, does not supersede that resolution.
Well, I guess I would have to ask you, what does that resolution define to you? As far as it defines to me, is the matrix study is still going, other than no layoffs.
Director Sanchez, yes. Having these workshops has been really helpful to this board, especially to myself. It answered some of my questions, and I think that one of the responsibilities of a board member is to make sure that we pass the budget in a timely fashion. And I realize it's a draft instrument and it's not cast in stone. I realize that, and I think our staff has learned today we need better communication, more open communication. And so with that, I would move to approve the budget for 2011.
I'll second that.
And ma'am, that is with the a couple adjustments.
With the eliminate the internship program, and then the $65,000 for LPPC comes out of your discretionary fund.
Understand.
I'll second it.
Just a second for discussion.
And like Director Hank said, that it doesn't supersede that resolution, there's no layoffs.
Understood.
I think another point that we have to get staff to come on board with us is long-term liabilities. They're not in this budget. And to say it's not part of the budgeting process is not correct. We need to know. We need... with the financial statements that come forward, and we have long-term liabilities, it should be more than a footnote. You know, it should be discussed with it. It should be part of the priorities, particularly if some of those liabilities are going to include long-term financing.
Agreed.
And Mr. Hanks, to that point, we'd like to come back and probably I'm saying this for Greg, he's got to do all the work, but come back in 3 or 4 weeks and let's discuss that in particular. And I understand you're going to be talking to Greg anyway about the budgeting process and what's included in it. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
Also, for the coming year, I would like to go back to the 2-member ad hoc committee. I'd like to have a finance committee and Director Hanks and one other board member to work more closely with Mr. Broking in the budgeting process and so forth. And I think that would give us also more clarity and more communication.
Oh, we'd certainly welcome that.
Yep.
I've got one issue before we vote that probably is a major drawback for me right now, and that's the rate stabilization fund. Whether you want to call it philosophical or the way I read the minutes of the policy, and I've had this discussion in the advisory group meeting, so Greg's aware of it. It's not something that he's going to smile about or jump up and down for, but he is aware that I have a disagreement with it, and I think it needs to come forward like Director Minville has talked about. We need to make sure that we have those funds because in my mind that's a covenant that we have with the ratepayers, and it needs to, we need to get it right. We're in a position where we need those funds. We'll probably need those funds for Unit 3, and I don't have a problem with that as long as we keep track and good accounting of it. But I need to hear something from staff on that before I vote.
On the 55 million?
Well, on the way we calculate the ECA. And I think it has to do with, and it goes back, I've researched that, and I need to sit down with Greg and bring him all my minutes and things that I've researched. And there's been a history with prior boards, and I'm talking about going way back, okay? Some of them are no longer with us. Not as members, I'm talking about here on earth with us, where there was a reluctance to adjust the base rate accordingly, or in some cases the ECA was spiraling, and this didn't have anything to do with hedging or anything. It was spiraling, and so instead of going back and making the tough call, they took the easy way out, which was a political way out, and they just transferred some of the costs from the ECA back into the rate stabilization fund, and the ECA went down or stayed the same, basically stabilized, but maintenance and operations suffered. And you start looking at the things that we're doing now with our poles, our generation, all of those, I believe, are the results of it. And we're trying to play catch up now, and as a board, we're struggling with those issues. And so I'm not saying that we're in a shape where we could just lower those rates and turn that money back. Because I think you just turn around and you have to raise the rates to satisfy it. But I want to make sure that we have a good accounting of it. And until we figure out what's going on with our bonding ability, I think we're going to, as a board, have to take some action to use some of that rate stabilization fund on the Unit 3. And whether we pay that back with debt service, back into the rate stabilization fund, interest-free, I think that's immaterial because the ratepayer is going to benefit from it regardless. But I would just like a good accounting of that. I struggle with it, and I struggle with it from an ethical standpoint. So I don't want to tell you right, wrong. I would like to hear something that we'd go back and look at that and get that squared around, and then I wouldn't have a trouble voting for this budget.
Well, we have planned a presentation on, I think it's January 11th, an ECA update. And it's really, the board has broad discretion on setting the rates. And so it's up to the board as to how they want to move forward with the ECA. I'll present various options, what I think are the best ones, and the board can, provide staff direction as to how they would like to proceed. Because at some point, if we do want to make a change, then I think it's best to have a couple of public hearings and have discussion with the public over the proposed changes and how it will affect everyone. And that initial presentation, like I said, is scheduled for the 11th.
Well, I think if we have good accounting and we are able to use that rate stabilization in place of large bonds, and I know there's plenty of bonds that we're going to be faced with. I think with the timing we're at with the economy, I think as far as ECA, I think that's going to be kind of stabilized for a while. And with the program that we have in procurement of the natural gas and some of the old contracts, possibly the ability to do something with all these capacity requirements. The capacity is just eating us up. Not just the purchase power agreements, but the natural gas has been squared around. Purchase power, we're looking at that. We're faced with renewables. That could be a consideration down the road. And if we get ahead of it now with the rate stabilization fund, and even though we're using it for bonding, the debt service would be coming back in, and it should be sufficient to cover any future spike that we might have for 3 or 4 years, like Mr. Adjayan had brought forward to us. I think if we manage it, I'm not saying cripple us or as an organization by changing the ECA. I just think that we need to be real careful how we calculate that so that we don't have legal issues coming out over this or challenges. I'm just saying, let's just do it right. And you may be doing it right, but I have a problem with it.
We'll do it right, but I can't control the legal challenges.
Well, okay, but you're telling me if I go through and I drag out all the action and the policies and so forth, then if there is a change, I think the accounting of it, if the board votes to change a policy, fine. But from that time on, it needs to be the way it was established and the way it was voted on by the board.
Right, I agree.
All right.
Yeah, I want to make a comment on the rate stabilization, about using the rate stabilization money for funding Unit 3. From my standpoint, I don't think it's right to the ratepayers that we're being sued by Mike Morgan and Rod Foster, and they're holding us hostage from going out in the bond market and getting bond money to build Unit 3. And for us to have to dip into the rate stabilization fund to pay for Unit 3 or pay for part of Unit 3 is a disservice to our ratepayers, to have a couple of landowners who want the water rights to the land and try to hold the district hostage, try to financially break the Imperial Irrigation District on both the water and energy side, and just because that they feel that the water rights belong to the land. And I, as one board member, am not going to be held hostage to that. I would agree with Director Mendoza where she says we should sue them. This is a frivolous lawsuit. I was with a bunch of landowners this morning, and some of them think it's pretty funny that they got the 218 going, and they think they're going to tie our hands and they're going to control the IID, and we're not going to be able to operate. They're going to bring us to our knees. And I, as an elected public official sitting here on this board, I have to make the tough decisions that we were elected to do. I'm going to make them, what I think is right for the ratepayer, whether it costs me this job or doesn't cost me this job. But I'm looking out for the big pie, not the few slices that are out there that'll benefit the few and damage the whole. And so I would be very reluctant to dive into the rate stabilization fund and use that money for Unit 3. I think we need to move forward. Let's sue them and get out on the bond market or beat them in court or whatever it takes. And I think that we need to get some of this information out into the newspaper to let the ratepayers know that these guys are causing us harm. The interest rates go up another $80 to $120 million against the ratepayer. That information needs to be out there. And so I'm not for dipping into the rate stabilization fund, but I do agree the ECA needs to be cleaned up. And Mr. Koch, and Mr. Broking, and Mr. Brady, you guys come back on the 11th of January, settle this thing out, and this board can make a decision, whether it's 3-2, 4-1, 5-0, or however it goes down. And then as Director Hank says, we live with it, proper accounting, we move forward. And the other only thing I was going to say is, every year that I've been on this board, I think we've gotten better with transparency. I think we've gotten better with accounting. Yes, there's questions in here that can still be questioned and answers for, but I know we have a bond covenant that we have to get this budget passed by the 31st of December, and I think we need to vote on it, move forward. And I think that as we move forward in 2011, that more accountable information needs to come forward to this board, put it on a table, the public can see it, the board can see it. We have questions, let's discuss them. I think an open policy is the best policy, and less things behind closed doors, more things out in the public. Thank you.
If I could add one thing on the rate stabilization account, no money has been withdrawn from that account. It still has $53.5 million, and no money will be withdrawn until the board takes action, if and when they decide to take action.
I'm aware of that, but that number you and I probably disagree on.
Mr. Desert?
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, so we've had two board members talk about the rate stabilization account and what they feel it should be used for. My concerns are adopting this budget and addressing the $55 million that you presented to us as was profit or extra revenues that the IID has for this year. If we adopt this budget, are we tying our hands and incorporating that $55 million into the Unit 3 repower, or should we first address and put it into the rate stabilization account and then perhaps bring it out later, keeping in mind the ECA covenants and trying to get this ECA equation correct?
The profit you're talking about is really revenue less expenses before capital improvements. So yes, the plan will be to, while the lawsuit is going on, is to use that $55 million or so that's being generated to help fund not only El Centro Unit 3 repowering, but any capital projects that the Energy Department is planning on spending in 2011.
So none of the $55 million is the ECA over collection?
No, I don't believe there's ever been an overcollection in the ECA, and the money going into the rate stabilization fund that we put in last year, it does two things for us. One, which is pretty obviously, it sets aside that amount of money as a reserve. But the other thing that it does is it's a financial tool for us to, lack of a better term, control our debt service coverage ratios. And the reason why that transfer is important, it's just very difficult for any public utility to raise and lower their rates based on the way the market moves from year to year. So yes, some years you're going to have better years than others. When you have the good years, you kind of bank it and use it when you don't have such a good year. And then when you need to, you pull that money out and put it in revenue, and that boosts your debt service coverage. So those are really two of the big benefits of setting aside that rate stabilization fund. And like I said before, then it's by resolution that we can't move money out of there until the board takes action.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I'm new on the board, but from the audience and observing a year ago, it seems like the energy or the momentum to create the rate stabilization account was the concern to address the ECA portion of the profits from last year, the $87 million.
That was never my motivation. My motivation was as I just mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think Oscar has. Go ahead, Oscar.
I think that's part of the problem, Greg. There's someone that's been here longer than you, and there's, your position is different from what was reflected in the minutes, what was told to the public. Okay, from a standpoint of a financial well-being of this organization, you're right on. But that's where we're having this problem. When can we expect the unaudited actuals to come forward?
March. Well, we have to get November's to you first, which probably will be early part of next year. I don't think we close 2010 till sometime in February.
Yeah.
So it probably won't be until March that we could bring you unaudited, and shortly thereafter, maybe by March or April, we would have audited financials.
Yeah. Well, when they come forward, are you? Do you see a need at that time to amend the budget, or?
I don't foresee a need to amend the budget at that point, at least 2010, because 2010 will have passed. I may or may not have a recommendation to move money into the rate stabilization fund. It's too early to say at this point, but that may be an occurrence.
Oscar, go ahead.
Could I ask one other thing while I'm up here? Director Mendoza had asked to have a two-person subcommittee, and I'm hoping to schedule meetings early part of next year. So I was wondering if the board could take action tonight to pick that director to assist Director Hanks.
I was going to bring that up in the first meeting in January with a list of all the committees that, unless we don't have that for action in today's.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'll do that the very first meeting in January.
Okay, then I'll hold off scheduling my meeting with Director Hanks till we get the additional board member.
Well, with the unaudited actions when they come forward, based on the motion with the board talked about different type format or something for budgeting purposes. If we move that direction, I would like to see that be implemented, not wait until the whole budget process of next year, because the purpose was to get information to the board, and if they're in agreement with it, that maybe we could start transition, and I think it would make this whole process a lot easier.
I agree. As we discuss the issues and move forward with changes, I wouldn't wait. I would bring them, as you say, at that particular point in time.
Yeah, I'd be willing to work with Director Hanks on trying to make the budget in a different format so it was a little more understandable if that was possible. But that's up to this board to decide who's on these committees.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
We'll work on that in first meeting in January, our next meeting.
Oscar, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say, obviously had a long speech, but I think it's moot because you're going to vote probably 5-0. But Mr. President, my name's Oscar Gonzalez. I'm a Calexico resident now, and I want to thank the board, the administration, and ladies and gentlemen for coming to these meetings. It hasn't been fun, and even the Jewish Chinese liberal went the second budget meeting. He was kind of nervous, and I see that he's happy today. I think that the budget review process, I'm changing my discussion. I'm improvising what I'm saying. That the budget review process for me reminds me of reading the Bible. I don't understand. I read it, and I think I do, but I need a priest to help me understand, like I need you guys to elucidate and enlighten me. Certainly, Director Lady Mendoza impressed me last meeting because she was on fire. She looked like she was going to put her boxing gloves, and I'm afraid to.
Ask me if I care, if I impress you.
Well, I'm just telling you what I say.
I understand. Go on.
I don't need for you to repent or apologize.
I'm not repenting. I'm not apologizing.
I think you are. But nevertheless, I'm a gentleman, and I have to treat you with dignity and respect. And
Oscar,
go on.
This is a time for questions. We did public comments at the beginning.
No, wait a minute,
you weren't here
let me finish.
You weren't here for the beginning?
No, I want to.
So this is a time for a question on the budget.
Well, I want to say...
Ask questions.
No, I'm not asking a question. I want to make a statement.
The time for public comments was an hour and a half ago.
Mr.
Call for the question then, if you want.
Okay.
You have a question?
Yes.
What's your question?
Okay, I'm going to ask. Mr. President, I don't think you understand, or why is it you don't understand your job? Your job is to bring consensus. And it seems to me that during the budget process, the last 3 meetings, considering also in November, you were articulating the position of Mr. Manville and the administration. And I'm glad that Mr. Hanks and I'm glad my friend Mr. Desert is on board, because I think he's going to be just as critical in his critical thinking like Mr. Abadi. And I'm not so sure that you understand. Why is it you don't understand that your position as a president is to bring consensus and not to alienate and waste people's time? That's the question.
Well, I gave you an example earlier. I think there was a 5-0 vote on the 65,000 that brought consensus. Me and Mr. Benville weren't going to vote for it. I'm not sure the other two. We both commented on it, so I'm not sure how the other 2 people were going to vote. But I think we got a 5-0 consensus on removing $65,000 and bringing it to Mr. Brady's budget. So that's one example. I can talk to you rest of other consensus, but I think we do have fundamental disagreements on values, which I think sometimes really nobody wants to cross the line. So do you have any other questions?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. I have comments. Of course, I continue to hold to my position of the Great Recession in 2008, where the district decided to use $30 million of its reserves, the people's money, not to raise rates in 2008. I couldn't see myself having people while they're losing their jobs pay more for electricity, and I continue to hold to my position that I did not take any sort of type of action or bring any type of policy to the board in the last year to have it to stop the rate stabilization funds from reaching $52 million. I still strongly believe that we were just rebuilding our cash reserves that we used in 2008. So after saying that, I will call for the question. Please vote.
Wait a minute. I've got a comment. Are you saying that the
I've been saying it for 6 months.
Well, you just lost my vote on it. All right, go ahead.
You probably weren't going to vote on it anyways.
Since we have a resolution that you guys are adopting, and it has changed, can I get with Mr. Kelly so he can revise it? And I'll fax it over to all the board members.
Pardon me?
Would you say that again?
The resolution before you,
yes.
It says that you're adopting the budget as presented on December 7th, which is not the case.
No, it's not.
Things are changing. So we need to revise the resolution?
Well, we're approving this resolution with the changes, yes. That.
And I'll second that.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Well, I don't understand, Director Hanks, is that you can sit there and say we did an over-collection, and yet when I defend myself that it isn't, and now you don't want to vote for it because I said my piece?
No, if you're saying that the delta that we had and the reason that we made the change that we did and we brought in experts to help us get this squared around was due to the Great Recession, I take offense to that.
What experts?
So does probably everybody that's a ratepayer. That is, but you can say whatever you want to.
You pose no question, though. What's your question? The experts? What do you mean by the experts? No, I think this is a discussion we need to have, because obviously we keep saying 2 different stories out to the public. Well, and I'm ready to have this discussion. I've always been ready to have this discussion.
You didn't read the Baker Street report.
The Baker Street report where there was a hedging fiasco? Did not we reduce 5 cent to 4 cent to pay some of that back?
We had a $117 million delta, and we worked hard to get that corrected. This staff has worked hard to get it corrected. It has been corrected, and we have money in the rate stabilization from that correction, okay?
And that's exactly what I was saying.
And we're backfilling now with additional costs, okay, to use on that ECA. And it's costs that were not figured in to the first calculation, and that's what I'm saying. And I just want clarification that is brought forward. I'm not clear that it's going to come forward. It's going to be cleaned up.
And that's
we're going to clean it up.
And that's why I didn't vote on then Director Abadi's motion back in August of going back to the regular ECA because of those exact same issues that you just brought up. I wanted a new ECA because I didn't want to backfill or put ECA costs into the base rate.
What you call the Great Recession, when all this happened, this state was flying high.
This state was flying high?
It was flying high. There was homes being built. That was after
2008?
This happened before 2008.
You're talking about the gas hedging, which... All right, 2 separate items. Please vote. All right, thank you.